Welcome to Write to Publish, your go-to podcast for all things writing and publishing. I'm Karen Stanley, a 14 times published author and the founder of Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Join me as I share a multitude of tips and insights drawn from my own writing and publishing journey. We'll be hearing from some inspirational authors too, who will share their writing experiences and top tips for success. Each week, we'll learn about an aspect of writing, from composition to genre and from publishing to marketing. Listen in as we learn and chat about all things writing and publishing, and let's get you on the right path. Hello and welcome to another episode of Write to Publish with me, Karen Stanley. It's lovely to have you join me here again this week. So not a particularly long episode this week. We're just going to talk about editing, about the types of editing, and of course the power of good editing for your book. There are several types of editing, and the main ones we'll address today are developmental editing, copy editing, sometimes known as line editing, and then you've got proofreading. So a developmental edit is where, and these are very different skills. You'll often find that some editors will be developmental editors and some editors will be line editors, and quite often they won't do both jobs because it's a very different skill. So a developmental editor will look at your manuscript as a whole. If you imagine like a bird's eye view of your manuscript, they will look at it from above and see how the whole thing hangs together compositionally, structurally. They won't really be looking at the nitty gritty, the line editing, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So they're not really interested in capital letters and full stops. They're not really interested in grammar or punctuation, but they are interested in the overall story, particularly for novels. They'll be looking at the overall plot. They'll be looking at your plot arc, whether it flows correctly, whether you've got any plot holes, whether you mention one thing in chapter 1 that you don't mention again throughout the rest of the book and it's not really relevant, so you might as well drop it from chapter 1. Or whether you mention, you set up a scene and then that scene doesn't come to fruition, or you've got your characters aren't quite sitting right with each other, or you've got different characters in different chapters, or you've muddled up who's doing what, or whether you've gone off on a bit of a tangent that doesn't sit with your plot arc as a whole. They'll be looking at the whole compositional structure of your story. How does it flow? How does it hang together? They'll be looking very much at pace as well. So, for example, when you have a developmental editor, sad as it is, there may be lots of your novel that ends up on the cutting room floor. They might say to you, this scene, it's far too descriptive. It slows the pace of your story. It's unnecessary. It doesn't move your story forward. It doesn't really sit with everything else in your story. It's just unnecessary clutter, and it's disengaging your reader. And there might be things like that they suggest that you cut. Similarly, there might be things that they say, well, actually, you've got this storyline going and you've got this protagonist, but I don't really understand what his reason is for his mission. So we know in a story arc, we'll have sort of rising action where all the conflicts and the problems and all of the friction starts to build up towards the climax of the story. So you might introduce this character and he might be on a bit of a mission, I don't know, to save the world or to avenge someone, or he might have a vendetta against someone or a grievance about someone, and your developmental editor might say to you, right, that's all very well, I know what he's doing and I know where he's going, but I don't really understand why he's doing it. And in order for your reader to really resonate with that character, relate to that character and get involved with that character, he might need a backstory. We might need, as the reader, we might need to know more about why this character is setting out on a path of vengeance and revenge. I hope that makes sense. It's basically looking at the overall structure, flow, and pace of your story, and that's a real kind of big picture view. And those kind of editors will quite often go through your book chapter by chapter. They will break down all of the action in each chapter. They will look to see if there's enough action in a chapter or too much, or whether the chapters flow and they're maybe not quite sitting in the right order, or you need to insert something or take something out. So it's real big picture stuff. And a good developmental editor should give you a report which tells you blow by blow, chapter by chapter, what's good, what's not working, what needs to be lost, what needs to be developed, what needs to be clarified, what needs to be taken further. Now, as with any kind of editing, you can use it or lose it. You can disagree with your editor and take none of their suggestions on board. But also, as a writer, you've got to get quite broad shoulders. You've got to get used to feedback. You've got to get used to taking constructive criticism if you want your work to improve and if you want to grow as a writer. Now, if that person's giving you that advice, might sting a little bit. You might have got really attached to a particular character, and you might feel a bit sad that they're now advising you to drop your favorite scene. And you might think, do you know what? No, I disagree, because that's really relevant to my story, and that's really an important and integral part of my story. But what I would recommend that you do is you take their feedback on board, and sometimes just go away and have a think about it. Allow yourself to process it. Give yourself a bit of breathing space, give yourself a little bit of time to think it through, then go back to the manuscript try and maybe have a bit of an objective viewpoint with a different set of eyes, and think, do you know what, if I take on board their suggestions, does it enhance my manuscript? If I'm honest with myself, does it move my story forward, and is it doing better things for my story? So, I would really recommend that you take the feedback on board, but you are quite within your rights to change it, lose it. But if you have a good editor worth their salt, then I would certainly, give value to what they say. After that, you've got line editing, and then we're getting into the much more the nitty gritty. We're looking at the actual compositional structure of your work, paragraph by paragraph, line by line. We're looking at grammar, punctuation, dialogue, vocabulary choice, spelling, all of the little nitty gritty details that may or may not need help and improvement or changes or what have you. And that's quite a painstaking process. And then once that's been done, you may then go to a proofread, which is just almost like just a quick whiz back through the manuscript, mopping up any kind of little bits that have been missed. Now, as with any editing, this is a lengthy process. I've had some sort of not disagreements, but a couple of authors got a little bit disgruntled or a bit disillusioned by the editing process. It's a long process, and if it's done properly, it takes hours, and there's no point rushing it, and there's no point doing a shoddy job, because all you'll end up with is a poorly edited, badly written manuscript, which will not do you any favors, your reputation as an author. And if it's too poorly edited, readers will get really sick of it. So it's a long process, and it's going to be costly. You can expect, in the region of £700 to £1,000 for a line edit. You can expect anything up to a couple of thousand for a full developmental edit. But if your stories, maybe we're talking round about 80 to 100,000 words. These are very ballpark figures. If you've got a really great editor, it might be a bit more. I would be very wary of someone who's offering to edit your manuscript for a couple of £100 or, for a very cheap price. I defy anyone to do a good job cheaply. And what you don't want is them to just whack it through AI. Programs like Grammarly and that, they're great for an initial look through, but there's nothing that will beat human eyes. They will not pick up on nuances of language. They will not pick up on colloquialisms and, like local language and dialects and things like that. And sometimes we use different language to what might be grammatically, in inverted commas, correct. So I wouldn't trust anyone who offers to do it too cheaply. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is. And if it's going to be done by AI, be very wary. It's a good tool, but it's not a replacement for a well edited manuscript by someone who knows what they're doing. The way that you can cut down on cost and editing time is to get yourself a couple of beta readers and get them to read through it first and give you some feedback. But as with an editor and as with a beta reader, make sure it's someone you trust and make sure it's someone who's got expertise in your genre. So if you've written a work of historical fiction, you don't really want a developmental editor who mainly deals with, horror writing or sci-fi. Some editors will do various genres, but quite often they will specialize in a particular genre just because of the types of, there's certain tropes and plot lines and structural kind of nuances to romantic fiction, for example, that are different to sci-fi or horror. So, those things will be very different and it will take different expertise for those manuscripts. So do your research and make sure you find someone with experience in your genre. Ask for, some samples of their work, or send them a piece of your work, send them a chapter. Get them to do a sample edit, which a good reputable editor will be more than happy to do, maybe like 500 words. They're not going to do the whole manuscript for you, but a few hundred words to give you an idea of how they work. And that will give you a really clear indication of the depth of editing that they're likely to do, the kind of professionalism of their feedback, the quality of their feedback. So do your due diligence, do your research, ask to see samples, look at reviews, try and find people who've used those editors so that you really know you're getting someone good. And you can find some great editors on sites like Reedsy, lots of freelance editors out there who will do a very good job. If you're going for a hybrid publishing model, at Mabel and Stanley Publishing, we often offer editorial services, but they're not cheap, they're not uber expensive, but they are, time consuming. So you're going to get what you pay for. If you're going to have a beta reader, try and make sure it's someone with a degree of expertise, i.e. in the fact that they are already a reader, so they understand the kind of technicalities of what a good novel looks like in their genre. Make sure that they are readers of that genre, so they've got experience of knowing what a book in that genre looks like. And try not to get someone who you don't know at all, because they might give you all kinds of negative feedback that is really lacking in credibility. Similarly, you don't want someone who, maybe your mum isn't the best person to give you a beta read feedback, because she might be inclined to not want to give you any kind of constructive feedback. She might be she might be quite brutal, or she might find that difficult. So think about the relationship you've got with the person who's going to beta read, and make sure you trust their opinion. But also do understand that they are not editors. So they're going to basically give you feedback overall normally. And then some of my beta readers will then have a final read through just to pick up any errors that might have been missed. 80% is a good target for editorial excellence. A book can have gone through several rounds of editing and still come out with the odd little mistake overlooked. That's not such a big problem, as long as it's not too many. Okay, so do your research, and if you've got a long novel, you are likely to need a developmental edit first, then you'll go to a line edit, and then you'll go to a proofread. If you're writing something like, I don't know, chick lit or romantic fiction, generally you might be able to get away without the developmental edit if the plot is slightly more linear. But obviously then if you've got something like historical fiction where you might have a lot of subplots and facts and things to check, which again is why you want an editor with experience in that genre, then you probably will want a developmental edit just to make sure that your writing's on point. And finally, before I leave you today, I'm going to state the obvious here. The reason you should get some form of editing on your book, it's not rocket science. If your book is poorly edited, it will not give you any kudos as an author. It will turn your readers off quicker than you can say Jack Sprat. They're not going to want to read a book that's riddled with mistakes. They'll lose interest in the story. It will discredit. You could have written a wonderful story, but if it's poorly edited, there's loads of errors. you know, no one's going to want to read that. Similarly, if there's loads of plot holes and gaps, people just get bored of that, and it will discredit you really quickly. So do not put out a book that has not been edited well, that is not is not going to make you proud, that's not going to do your reputation harm as an author. So think about the types of editing that you need, and make sure that you do your due diligence, you do your research, you get reviews, you get social proof, and make sure you choose the right person for your book, because the right person for your book might not be the right person for another book. And try as well to get some kind of rapport going. You might find a brilliant editor, but you clash, on a personal level. You've got to have someone that you trust, and that someone who you're going to be able to have sometimes quite difficult or emotionally charged conversations with. So you need a good relationship with your editor as well. You need to be able to get on with that person, and you need to be able to share feedback between you respectfully, and in a way that benefits you both. So that's my advice to you for the editing. But what my biggest takeaway from this is, do not skip the editing process. You will regret it. And if you do other books down the line, those books that are poorly put out will definitely come back to haunt you and not make you proud of your author journey. So editing is a necessary evil. It's not always cheap, but what it will do is make your manuscript grow. And when your book's been well edited, you'll read it through again and you'll go, aha, that's it now. Now it's got the wow factor. It just polishes it up and makes it something that you can be really proud of. As always, if you've got any questions, please do email me, Karen at Mabel and Stanley Publishing, or you can find me on all of the social media channels at Mabel and Stanley Publishing, or you can get in touch with me on my website, www.mabelandstanleypublishing.com. Always happy to hear from you, always happy to offer advice or give you feedback, and let you know what I would tips I would give you for your journey, and whether we work together or not. I'm always happy to do that. So thank you for listening, and let's get you on the right path as always, and I hope to see you all around and about again very, very soon.